So in this second part, we will segment the point cloud itself. So if we take a look at the folder, we should have our BIM OBJ files, our status JSON, and our Revit file. But now we're going to take a look at the point cloud itself. So here in your folder, PCD, TLS, SVM, UAV, you have a point cloud with no labels attached. So mine is around 2 GB, and I can load it into Cloud Compare. What else do we need? That's, of course, our class JSON or the classes Excel file that you can see here on the right-hand side. It has the IDs for the different classes. Note that this is an older version. So here we have 255 labeling, but in the older version, it's actually 100 decimal numbering. So building materials will be 200, formwork will be 201, and so forth. So what we do now is actually segment the point clouds, and for that we can of course use our BIM. So we will import the not constructed, under construction, and constructed OBJs. The unseen are not important. And we can import these meshes, but they show up as dark colorization. So the first thing we will do is actually switch them to their wireframe representation. So you have to unmark the materials texture in the properties and mark the wireframe instead for all three classes. Also, we're going to give them a unique color because now they're colorized all in green. So for instance, the constructed elements can remain in green, but let's mark the not constructed in red. So you go to Edit, Colors, Set Unique. So that's a red color. And then, of course, we have the under construction. We can give it an orange color. So Edit, Color, Set Unique, Orange. There we go. So if we turn off the point cloud for a second, here we can see our Revit model according to the elements that are not constructed or under construction. Now, not constructed is quite a big group. So here we can see, for instance, we have the 2 elevator shafts that are still under construction. They're still in formwork, but a lot of the columns have already been completed. 2 columns to watch are, of course, these 2 columns that might be still in formwork in this week. And let's see if they are now fully completed. But normally you should already decide this based on the BIM. So the easiest way to segment the point cloud is using the sectioning tool. So you have to only segment a small portion of the point cloud at a time. So you click your point cloud and go to the cross section tool. And I'm going to use cross sections in the X direction of my model. Typically, I take around 20 meters. Of section width. And here we can export with slices, we can export the multiple cross sections in the X direction that we want to export. Now, if you wanted to downsample the point cloud, that's not a problem. You can segment a downscaled point cloud because in the end, we are going to match the segmented point cloud with the original point cloud. So you will have the full resolution again. So don't be afraid to downsample this point cloud. I here have 80 million points, but I have a powerful computer. So if you have troubles with speed, you can downsize this, for instance, by subsampling of 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, whatever is necessary to still segment the objects. Just know that it's not going to be a problem for the final product. So now we have a set of slices. Now, notably, we don't have to segment all of them. For instance, here, the ones on the side, they are not important to me. Every point that will not be labeled will just turn up as noise, and I'm perfectly fine with this. So let's mark all of these. I can use the right-click toggle to turn them off. And let's segment our first slice. Now, as you can see, these are just a portion of the surroundings. So that's actually doesn't need very much segmentation. I can just call this its correct class. So for instance, this one is just outdoor. It's the surroundings of the scene. So it's outdoor class. So that will be 600. remember we are using 100 decimal numbering. So this is just outdoor. The name is not important, only the number. There we go. So we already get rid of this slice. And let's go to the next slice. That's our first real slice of the site. And we can use our BIM model to actually indicate where certain objects are. So we just take a side view to start. I always like to segment the floor first. So to segment, you just press P, and you can use the polygon or the rectangular selection for the marking of the object. So here I mark a portion of the floor. I press O to segment everything that is outside. It automatically goes to pause, so I can move around, zoom in a little bit, whatever I want to do. I can press pause to activate the selection again. I can mark some more points, press O again to add it to the selection. And if I'm done, I press enter. And that gives me 2 point clouds, namely one for the floors and one for the remainder of the site. So I will label this class. Now remember, we can assign both class labels and material labels, especially for the primary building elements and the secondary building elements. So this is, of course, it's a floor, which is a slab, which is 003. And then the material, of course, is concrete. So if we take a look at concrete, it's 25, or in this case, 205. So this is a slab made out of concrete. There we go. Now, noticeably, I missed a portion. That is not a problem. I can go back to my point cloud and segment some more data. So I press T again. Here, I press O. I think that will be fine. So I press enter. And I can add this section to my already segmented slab. So I press the slab first and then the second point cloud, because now if I merge them, the name will be preserved of the slab concrete. Okay, so let's continue. For instance, here we have some containers standing around. So we press T again. Now we will take the polygon selection tool like this. These are obviously containers. This one is a container as well. So I press spacebar. And that's it for the containers in this section. So I press enter. So containers obviously are part of the site layout. So it will be 501 container. What else can we mark? For instance, here we have a toilet. Those are always interesting. There's no other toilets here. So a toilet is also a site layout element. In this case, it's 502 toilet, and so on. Now here we have our columns. And as you can see, it indeed is still in its formwork. Now, if I was unsure what this element was, I can activate my BIM. And here you can easily identify where columns are in case you missed some. So I press T. Now I can use the rectangular selection because the floor is already gone. So this is a column. I will take a look at the other column here. Like this. Let's see if I missed some columns. No, there doesn't seem to be still columns left. So a column is a primary building element. So it is 001, and it's still in formwork. So it's 201. If you take a look in the scale here, 201. So this is a column which is in formwork. Now these ones are a bit tricky. Here you can see the elevator shafts, but they're actually also still in formwork. So these obviously will be walls in formwork. Go. Second elevator shaft should be here over somewhere. There we go. So that's going to be obviously their walls. Walls is 004. Formwork is 201, so that's walls in formwork, and so on. Now let's take another class. For instance, the rebar. Rebar is always an interesting one. So here we take a selection. Here is a big stack of rebar. Uh, these are all formwork. Here I have a big piece of rebar. Here there's a lot of rebar laying around, so maybe let's mark this one. It shouldn't be perfect, just that you have actually identified a big portion of it. There we go. So rebar obviously is 202 rebar, and so on. So this goes pretty smoothly. And if you're happy with your course segmentation, because note this is a course segmentation, we can save these results in a separate folder. So in our PCD, we have our PCD SFM, where our main point cloud is, but we just make a folder segmentation from photogrammetry in this case, and we save the loss file here for the different classes. Note that you can have different loss files, for instance, container 1, container 2, just whatever container you found, because you have to iterate between your original point cloud and the stuff that you already segmented. But this is the result of the course segmentation, where you save a bunch of loss files for the different classes. Now, in a second stage, we have to assign the class labels. So let's turn this down. So if I take a look at my segmentation of photogrammetry, these, of course, only contain class labels and not object labels. So for instance, if I take a look at this rebar, I have some piles of rebar laying around on the site. Now, obviously, I can segment them manually to create the individual objects, but in this case, they are quite disconnected, so I can use the connected components tool to actually do this automatic. So I just press the connected components tool on the top left, and I choose a certain step size. So that should be smaller than the smallest gap between the objects that you want. Now my objects are quite spread out, so 60 centimeters seems fine. So if I run this code, I get a bunch of potential clusters. Now note that not every one of these clusters is valid, and also there is noise present. Now the biggest cluster is reported first, and you can already see that this is a little bit too optimistic. So you can either segment it manually in this case. For instance, I will do this, enter T, enter, just to create 3 separate instances that I want to. But on the other end, I also have very small cluster. For instance, cluster 18, if I press Z, I zoom to the element. Well, that's actually a little bit too small for the detection. It should be a notable, sizable object. So the idea is that you iterate through these objects and you identify the cutoff size for the object. So these are all still valid clusters, but they will start to be smaller and smaller. So here it's already pretty small, but it's still a sizable cluster. This one as well, this one as well. But from here, I can tell that this is actually too small to be a relevant rebar detected on the site. So 16, 17, and 18 can just be deleted. They will be added to the noise class in the final model. So I first have to inspect the big ones just to confirm. So here we have another choice. So I will segment this really quickly. Yep. There I go. So now I have my correct clusters in my scene. And the final step, of course, is to merge these point cloud, and this time you merge them with the original cloud index, and the result is a scalar field of your point cloud that identifies the different objects. And you can save this file under the correct name. For instance, this is 202 rebar. And what you typically do is you create a folder called connected components within this folder, and here you will save your final model. So I will save this as rebar. Now note that you have to add the scalar field manually at the end. For instance, here we go to extra scalar fields. There is no scalar field attached, so you have to manually add it. And we want to save the original cloud index. If you don't add an original cloud index, obviously your object is going to be treated as one object. So the result of this segmentation is a connected components with the object labels present in the dataset. And this is actually the input of the script. So if you go to the code and you go to script 0 PCD label production, that's of course in the root folder of our project. Here, if I go to benchmark dataset, here in code, you will find all the different scripts for the label production. And if we take a look at the code, we can just set the inputs. For instance, here I choose a certain epoch which meets week 22, and the type of classification, that's not important. It just has to do with the folder structure. You can change this as you want. But more importantly, I have the point cloud input folder. So here we have the connected components folder. We have our original point cloud. So that is going to be the point cloud on which we transfer our labels. We have the IFC path because obviously our objects should be tied to the IFC GUIDs in our IFC. We have the status JSON that we exported in phase 1. We have the projects and the class JSON. So those are also located at the root. So here we go to projects, classes. This class JSON is where all the IDs are stored. And here we can see, for instance, for the doors, our real ID is 12, but the temporary ID is 102. That's just an older version of the code. And it's, of course, identified as an IFC door as a secondary building element. What else do we have? We have the output path. So obviously, that's going to be the same name as the input path, but we add labels on top of that. So the output obviously is going to be PCD. We start with this one and the connected components, and we end with a JSON with the objects and the labels. And the label file is over here. Now, the detection thresholds are not important. You can just leave them as is. So what the script does is basically it loads all the point clouds from this folder. It imports the IFC. It imports all the classes. It assigns the segmentation class to the point clouds. It assigns the status to the BIM nodes. It assigns the BIM information to the point clouds. And it creates individual point clouds for every single object. And it matches it with the IFC. So every BIM object, especially for the primary and the secondary element, will be assigned a certain IFC GUID based on the IFC model. Now, sometimes we get double occurrences that get filtered over here, and here we compute the 3D object information. And here we assign all of the information to the original point cloud with 4 scalar fields. So here you see the segmentation labels. So those are the classes like door, wall, slab. The material labels are, of course, formwork, rebar, concrete. The object labels go from 0 to the length of the number of objects, with 0 being the noise. And the status label goes from 0 to 3, unconstructed, unseen, unconstructed, and so forth. So here you can see the first 2 are, of course, integer 8 values, and the rest is, this one is, of course, an integer 16 because we have more than 265 objects. And here you can see all the information in the JSON. So we get a class ID, a material ID, an object ID. We also get the IFC GUID if it's present, and the status ID, and then some metric information. So if we export this data, we can take a look at the JSON. And here, for instance, you see in these are walls from the formwork. So this was the name of the point cloud. It's also always very informative, also to check whether it is correct. So we have class ID 4. We have material ID 21, so that's formwork. We have object ID 336. The IFC ID is this one, and status ID is 2, so it's under construction. And this is the information. We also add some color label. That's for the image classification that I will show in another video. But so these are the outputs of the coarse and fine segmentation phase. Good luck.